Princess Anne had entered the private chamber prepared for an uncomfortable legal briefing. She did not expect to hear Diana's name. She certainly did not expect the judge to confirm that a sealed collection of the late princess's letters had been deliberately hidden under Camilla's authority. But when the court clerk read the final paragraph aloud, Anne's expression emptied, her fingers tightened around the edge of the table, and the entire room fell into stunned silence. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Anne stared at the court file. 23 letters, written by Diana during her final years married to Charles, had been placed under a restricted archival order. That order meant the correspondence could be preserved and protected, but never controlled by a future royal spouse. Those pages carried the late princess's voice and her wishes for William and Harry. The judge continued. Camilla had concealed the collection inside a private Windsor storage holding, blocked its transfer to the royal archives, and failed to disclose it when Anne requested a complete inventory. The royal archives are the official collection preserving historic royal records. By keeping the letters outside that system, the queen consort had placed personal judgment above a binding instruction. Anne did not move. She removed her glasses, set them beside the file, and asked the clerk to repeat Camilla's name. He did. The words struck harder. Queen Elizabeth had signed a decree naming her daughter as protector of sensitive correspondence connected to Diana, William, and Harry. A decree is a formal written command carrying authority beyond household preference. That duty had been violated beneath Anne's watch. Charles sat 2 seats away, staring at the table. He could not meet his sister's eyes, and that silence told her more than any confession. The king may not have arranged it, but he had known enough to fear the truth. Anne felt betrayal settle, not as rage, but as something colder. Then came the forbidden letter. Diana had recorded a private promise made by senior members of the royal household concerning William's future and Camilla's place within the monarchy. The court ordered every page transferred before sunset, and warned that further interference would strip the responsible person of authority over protected royal material. Anne rose. A solicitor told her Camilla was waiting in the adjoining room, ready to explain everything face to face. Anne had survived decades of royal conflict without losing control, but the woman waiting behind that closed door was about to test the one loyalty she had never allowed anyone to question: her loyalty to the truth. To understand why Anne's reaction was so devastating, the letters cannot be treated as pieces of paper. They were the final voices of a woman who had once stood inside the royal family, yet often felt trapped beyond its protection. Diana had trusted carefully, Camilla had waited patiently, and Anne had remained publicly silent. Now those 3 women were connected by a secret capable of reopening every wound the monarchy had spent decades trying to close. Anne knew the truth was complicated. Her relationship with Diana had never been easy. They moved through royal life with different temperaments, expectations, and ideas about duty. Yet the Princess Royal had respected the younger woman's devotion to William and Harry. That devotion mattered because every choice Diana made returned to the safety of her sons. Camilla carried a different fear. She had spent years building stability beside Charles, only to discover that the correspondence could drag her back into the triangle she believed the monarchy had escaped. The queen consort, the wife of the reigning monarch, understood that one letter could erase decades of service and reduce her public life to the pain of the past. Anne remembered one conversation with brutal clarity. After a strained family gathering, Diana had stopped her in a quiet passage and asked whether the institution would protect her boys if she were no longer there. Anne had answered that duty would prevail. Now, alone outside the courtroom, she pressed one hand against the wall and felt that promise turn against her. The letters suggested the family had not protected Diana's final trust. Camilla waited in the adjoining chamber, smoothing the sleeve of her coat repeatedly. She feared the court, but she feared Charles more. If the king chose the crown over their marriage, she would face the truth alone. Charles had defended her for years, yet even he might step back when Diana's voice returned. William still knew only fragments. Anne refused to let aides, headlines, or a palace statement deliver the blow. She insisted that the prince hear it from her, because the letters involved his mother, his inheritance, and promises about his future. Then the court summary revealed something worse. Several pages referred to an agreement covering access to Diana's apartments, her jewelry, and correspondence intended for her sons. Before Anne could enter the next room, the court archivist identified the starting point. A formal Windsor ceremony everyone had dismissed as routine. The secret had not begun inside a courtroom or behind an archive door. It had begun during a formal royal ceremony, when one small request forced Camilla to make a choice she would spend years trying to hide. Years before the court exposed the hidden letters, a polished silver box arrived at Windsor during a private memorial ceremony for Diana. Few people noticed it. Fewer understood what it contained. But as the family prepared to honor the late princess, an archivist approached Camilla with a transfer form, requiring only one signature. She looked at the name written across the folder, closed the box with both hands, and made the decision that would eventually bring Anne to a frozen silence. The ceremony carried no cameras, speeches, or room for mistakes. Charles, William, Harry, Anne, and Camilla had gathered to mark an anniversary connected to Diana, each carrying a memory of her. The memorial was a closed family observance, meaning the event stayed outside the public schedule and allowed grief to remain personal. That secrecy mattered because it gave one decision the power to escape notice. Camilla remained behind as the others began to leave. The keeper of private correspondence, the official responsible for safeguarding royal letters, placed the silver box before her and requested approval for its transfer to Anne's custody. Inside were 23 sealed letters written by Diana. Queen Elizabeth's confidential instruction required material involving William and Harry to remain beyond the personal control of any future consort. The first inventory line changed everything. Camilla saw references to conversations involving Charles, and her face tightened. She asked the archivist to leave the box while she sought clarification. Moments later, the king entered and found her gripping the transfer form. She warned him that releasing the letters could destroy the peace surrounding their marriage. He refused to read them, yet told her to handle the matter quietly. That sentence became permission without protection. Camilla marked the collection temporarily restricted and moved it into a Windsor holding reserved for items belonging to the reigning couple. A temporary restriction was meant to delay access while ownership was checked. She renewed it again, then again. Each renewal pushed the box further from the official inventory until the transfer order seemed to disappear. Months later, Anne studied the archive list and noticed the missing entry. She asked an aide where Diana's correspondence had gone. He replied that no such collection existed. The Princess Royal set down her pen and stared at the empty line, sensing a lie she could not yet prove. Now the court had recovered the form bearing Camilla's handwritten instruction, and Anne carried a copy toward the adjoining room where the queen consort waited. The past was no longer hidden beneath seals and signatures, and when Anne opened the adjoining door, Camilla understood that the confrontation she had postponed for years had finally arrived. There were no aides in the room, no private secretaries, and no ceremonial distance to protect either woman. Anne entered carrying the recovered transfer form. Camilla remained beside the window, one hand resting against the back of a chair. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then the Princess Royal placed the document on the table, pushed it slowly across the polished surface, and asked the only question that mattered. Why did you take them? Anne closed the door herself. That act stripped away protocol and every formal shield the palace placed between conflict and consequence. This was not an official interview. It was a private reckoning between two women who knew how royal silence could protect a family in public while destroying trust behind closed doors. Camilla drew a slow breath. She said the letters carried accusations and memories that could have destabilized Charles when his position was fragile. The queen consort, the wife of the reigning monarch, insisted she had feared collapse around Charles. Anne stopped her before the explanation could become a defense. Anne said the correspondence had never belonged to Camilla. It belonged to Diana's sons, and Queen Elizabeth's instruction had protected it from personal control. That instruction was a binding written order, not a suggestion that could be ignored when the truth became uncomfortable. The Princess Royal's voice stayed low, but every word landed harder than anger. Camilla admitted the fear beneath her decision. She believed William would read the letters and see her forever as the woman who had replaced his mother. Her voice broke as she said she had been trying to protect her marriage. Anne lifted the recovered transfer form and pointed to the handwritten restriction. "Did Charles authorize this?" she asked. Camilla looked toward the closed door. The silence answered first. Then she confessed through a recorded statement requested by the court that the king knew she had delayed the original transfer, but he did not know she had renewed the restriction year after year. Truth cut deeper. Camilla revealed that one letter contained Diana's written request that she never control the late princess's rooms, jewelry, correspondence, or memorial decisions. Anne stared at her and said fear might explain concealment, but it could never excuse stealing a dead mother's voice from her children. Camilla sat down as if her strength had vanished. At that moment, the door opened. Charles entered, saw the form between them, and understood that his choices were now on trial. Camilla had finally admitted what she had done, but the more dangerous question remained unanswered. How much power had Charles allowed her to exercise, and who now possessed the authority to take it away? The courtroom revelation did more than expose a secret. It activated an instruction written years earlier by Queen Elizabeth, an order designed for the exact moment when private loyalty threatened royal duty. Charles believed the decision still rested with him. Camilla hoped her husband could contain the damage. But when Anne unfolded the late monarch's sealed directive and read the final clause, both understood that control over Diana's letters had already passed beyond their hands. Charles took the document and read it beside the table. The sealed directive was a confidential royal order created for moments when protected family material was mishandled. Its final clause established a three-person custodial group: Anne, William, and an independent royal archivist. That group, not the king's household, would decide the fate of Diana's correspondence. The court confirmed why the order carried such force. Elizabeth had attached it to the protected conditions governing the letters before her son became monarch, meaning later household wishes could not cancel it. Charles reached the final sentence, lowered the page, and said nothing. For the first time, the king understood that his title could not return authority his mother had placed elsewhere. Anne watched him in cold disbelief. She asked whether protecting his marriage had mattered more than honoring Elizabeth's instruction. Charles admitted that he had allowed Camilla to delay the original transfer because he wanted to prevent another family war. His sister answered that avoiding conflict had never created peace. It had only forced William to live without knowledge that belonged to him. Camilla remained near the table, hearing every word. The queen consort knew the court had given Anne immediate authority to recover the letters, inspect Windsor storage rooms, and suspend her access to restricted correspondence until the review ended. Restricted correspondence meant private royal material that could be opened only by people named under formal protection. The explanation changed nothing. Her control was over. Anne opened Camilla's folder, removed the small Windsor access key, and placed it inside her handbag. She made no speech. Camilla offered no protest. Both women understood that the quiet gesture carried more force than public humiliation ever could. Then came the final blow. William would personally choose whether the forbidden letter remained sealed, entered the archive, or was released privately to him and Harry. Charles asked Anne to delay telling his son until he could speak first. She looked toward the corridor. A royal car was already bringing the prince to Windsor. The legal authority had shifted in a matter of minutes, yet the true fallout would begin only when William entered the castle and learned that his mother's final words had been kept from him. William arrived expecting a procedural discussion. Instead, Anne placed a sealed inventory before him and told him that his mother had written letters he had never been allowed to see. He did not react immediately. He read the first page twice, turned to his father, and asked how long the family had known. When Charles hesitated, the prince closed the folder with deliberate care, and that controlled gesture frightened everyone more than anger would have. Anne spoke first. She explained the court's ruling without softening it. Diana's correspondence had been hidden, Camilla had maintained the restriction, and Charles had known the original transfer was delayed. A sealed inventory was an official list of protected items that could not be altered without authority. That mattered because the letters included personal messages for both sons, reflections on royal life, and instructions about their mother's private legacy. William looked at his father. He asked why nobody had trusted him with the truth. The king replied that reopening the past might deepen wounds the family had barely survived. His son answered that silence had not healed anything. It had created a new wound, built from years stolen from him and Harry. Anne felt the question coming before he asked it. Had she known? Her eyes filled with regret as she admitted she had suspected missing material but had never been shown proof. The Princess Royal did not defend herself. She simply said she should have pushed harder, because Diana had trusted duty to protect her children. Camilla entered after being summoned. She apologized through a recorded statement prepared for the court, then repeated the apology directly to William. He remained standing, listened without interruption, and moved the sealed inventory away from her side of the table. The gesture was quiet, but final. Camilla removed her gloves and folded them carefully. She admitted she could not defend keeping a mother's words from her children. The queen consort understood that she would no longer share authority over Diana's rooms, jewelry, letters, or memorial decisions. Then the archivist delivered the final shock. One envelope was addressed jointly to William, Anne, and the woman who may one day stand beside the king. The wording suggested Diana had anticipated Camilla's future position. William refused to open it before the full family. He asked Anne to accompany him to the archive room without advisors. Charles stepped forward and requested 1 private minute with his son. No title could protect them from this. William had every reason to walk away from his father, but the choice he made in that painful moment would determine whether the letters destroyed the family or finally forced it to speak honestly. For once, there were no lawyers, courtiers, or household officials between Charles and William. The king closed the door and remained standing, while his son faced the darkened window. Neither man mentioned titles. Neither spoke about duty. Charles simply admitted that he had been afraid the letters would revive Diana's pain, condemn Camilla, and prove that he had failed as both husband and father. William's reply was quiet. Fear had never given him the right to choose silence for everyone else. Charles faced the consequence he had postponed for years. He admitted that he allowed the first delay because he believed the monarchy could not survive another public battle involving Diana and Camilla. The monarchy meant the institution built around the sovereign, the royal family, and their public duties. To him, another scandal threatened not only his marriage, but the stability of the crown. William refused to let history become an excuse. He said the issue was no longer an old marital conflict. It concerned ownership of memory, his mother's dignity, and his right to receive words written for him. The prince spoke without raising his voice, yet every sentence stripped away another layer of protection. Charles then made the confession he had avoided. In that private conversation, he admitted he repeatedly chose not to ask Camilla whether the transfer had been completed. He knew that an answer would force him to confront her. Silence had allowed him to remain both husband and king, but only by abandoning his duty as a father. William told him that avoidance had trapped everyone. It left Camilla carrying power she should never have held, and Anne carrying responsibility without the truth. His father listened, removed his signet ring, and placed it on the desk. A signet ring is a traditional royal seal of identity and authority. Without it on his hand, Charles apologized as a father. William accepted the apology, but he refused to erase the consequences. Camilla would permanently surrender authority over Diana's possessions and correspondence. Charles agreed. He signed a written acknowledgement supporting the court's order and authorized Anne to restore missing material to its intended custodial arrangement, the protected system deciding who could control the material. William promised he would read the forbidden letter with Anne. He would not use Diana's words as a weapon, but he would never allow them to be buried again. When they entered the archive room, its opening sentence spoke not of revenge, but of keeping her sons united. The family had expected the forbidden letter to contain an accusation, but its true message would reshape the scandal, just as the outside world discovered what had happened behind Windsor's walls. By morning, the private ruling had become a national reckoning. Television screens carried Anne's grave expression, newspapers printed Diana's name across their front pages, and crowds gathered outside Windsor demanding to know why a mother's letters had been hidden from her sons. Yet one image defined the entire day: William leaving the archive beside his aunt, holding a narrow sealed case, while Anne walked half a step behind him, her face set with unmistakable resolve. The palace moved quickly, but the damage had already escaped its walls. A formal statement confirmed that protected correspondence connected to Diana had been withheld from its proper custodians, and that an internal authority review had begun. That review meant officials would examine who controlled the letters, who ignored the transfer order, and whether royal power had been used to hide private truth. The stakes were no longer personal. They touched the crown's claim to act with honor. Broadcasters framed the scandal as a struggle between protection and historical truth. Anne became the human center of that debate because she had recovered the collection and refused to soften what had happened. One major newspaper printed the silver archival case beneath the headline, "Diana's voice returned to her sons." Outside Windsor's Henry VIII Gate, the main public entrance to the castle, people lifted copies above their heads as the crowd grew louder. Anne saw the front page inside a private sitting room. She folded the newspaper slowly and told William that Diana would have hated becoming the center of another royal battle. The prince answered that hiding her words had created the battle, not recovering them. His aunt looked at him, hearing both grief and resolve. Camilla watched a broadcaster call the concealment an abuse of trust. The queen consort switched off the television and sat alone. No statement could undo her choice. Outside, handwritten notes appeared near the gates. One read, "A mother's words belong to her children," and the sentence spread across evening coverage. Then the palace announced that Camilla had surrendered access to Diana-related archives, memorial planning, jewelry records, and private rooms. Charles publicly supported the transfer through a recorded palace address and accepted responsibility for failing to enforce the original order. The king would not let his wife carry the whole burden alone. Every decision made next would define what royal accountability truly meant now. As fury began to settle, Anne and William prepared to announce the letter's final fate and the meaning of Diana's forbidden message. The nation had already delivered its judgment on the concealment, but only Diana's words could determine whether this painful discovery ended in vengeance, forgiveness, or a permanent fracture inside the crown. The forbidden letter did not ask William to punish Camilla. It did not demand that Charles be condemned, nor did it call for old wounds to be displayed before the world. Diana's final request was more difficult than revenge. She asked that her sons be protected from secrecy, that her memory never become a weapon, and that the women who came after her understand one truth: love for the monarchy could never require the erasure of a mother. Anne read the next lines slowly. Diana had asked her to intervene if personal fear ever stopped William and Harry from receiving words intended for them. That request explained why Elizabeth later placed custodial authority in the Princess Royal's hands. Custodial authority meant the legal power to protect, control, and release sensitive material. Anne closed her eyes, remembering the promise she had made to safeguard the boys. William kept reading. The phrase, "the woman who may one day stand beside the king," was not an attack on Camilla. Diana had asked any future consort, meaning the spouse of a reigning monarch, to respect the boundaries around her children, possessions, and private voice. The prince understood that his mother wanted dignity, not revenge. William then made his decision. He would keep the most personal letters private while placing historically important correspondence under permanent archival protection. That protection meant the papers would be preserved under strict rules and could never again disappear into private control. His choice honored Diana without turning her pain into public spectacle. Camilla met him alone and apologized through a recorded private conversation kept with the court file. She offered no defense. William did not grant instant forgiveness, but he accepted that her surrender of authority was genuine and necessary. The queen consort would remain within the family, yet she would never again control Diana's legacy. Charles signed the permanent custodial order beside Anne and William. The king accepted responsibility and chose truth over the fragile appearance of peace. Then Anne carried the restored silver case into the secure archive room, placed it on the designated shelf, turned the key, and handed that key to William. The verdict was now completely final. Diana's letters did not destroy the crown. They forced it to remember that institutions survive only when they respect the human lives beneath titles. And as the archive door closed, Anne was no longer frozen by what had been concealed. She stood steady in the knowledge that Diana's voice had finally reached the people it was always meant to protect. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.